Dr. Janas's research interests include nutritional epidemiology and public health nutrition. Today's talk is called Food for Thought and will focus on the importance of healthy food for a healthy mind and body.
It's a great honour to be here today and to be talking to you in such a fantastic setting. And when I got the original invitation to speak at the Lifelong Learning Festival, in particular to be involved in the Cork Learning neighbourhoods, I must say I didn't have to think twice about it, partly because I'm originally from Balfihan, Toker area, so I did have a vested interest as well. But I just think for us, in the work we do, in the research we do, I think it's really, really important to try and get that message out to people in as many different formats as we can. So for me, it's a great opportunity to try and get some of our messages out there. I'm going to talk about food. If I can get this working. All right. But what I want to say is, there's an awful lot, we see a lot in the press about food and health, and sometimes we get very conflicting messages. But just to highlight and to flag that the link between food and health isn't a new concept. It's going back, to Hippocrates, who was the father of medicine. And he had said, let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. And he also highlighted the importance between what's happening in your gut and your brain and your functions. So in terms of that and what we see now in terms of the importance of our gut, the microbes and the gut microbiota, that has been around for a long time as well. I'm not going to focus on that, but just to flag that it's not a new idea, not new concepts. While I'm going to talk about food today, I do want to flag and highlight the importance of what we do and what I do in work. Food is where I concentrate on, but we can't look at it in isolation. We need to look at food in relation and in combination with other lifestyle behaviours. So our physical activity and the importance of being physically active, of not smoking, of low to moderate alcohol intake and healthy food intake. And it's the combined effect of all of those is what's important. I will be focusing on food today, but I do want to flag that it is the combined effect. And we know in relation to food, for example, and physical activity, if you're more physically active, you're more likely to have a healthier diet. If you're non-smokers, generally tend to have a better or a healthier diet than smokers. And for low to moderate alcohol consumption, if you have a low to moderate alcohol intake, you're more likely to have a healthier diet than somebody with a very high alcohol intake. So it's about the combination of all of those. And I always stress that we can't look at things. We don't live in silos and we don't live in isolation. It's about the combination of all of these things. So what I'm going to talk about, and just kind of a brief outline, is food for health, but why is it important in terms of the diseases that we're seeing in Ireland today, and not just Ireland, but globally. I'll look at what a healthy diet looks like, and then we'll maybe some practical tips on choosing a healthy diet and some practical information to help us choose the healthier options, and in terms of portion size as well. What portion sizes and kind of quick, easy guides to portion sizes. In terms of nutrition, I'm not by any means saying it's easy. It's not as plain and simple as the plain old spud. It's complex, it's complicated, and it's about more than just diet. It's about more than what we put into our mouths. It's about where we live, the environments we're living in, what food is available to us, and what choices do we have to make. So even today, by the very nature of the fact that you're here, it's out of routine, maybe your patterns of eating today are slightly changed just because you're here, and your lunch times or other things may have changed. It's also about who do we eat with and where do we eat. Are we eating by ourselves, or are we eating as a family or as a group? And our eating habits are also influenced by those who we're eating with as well. It's also, we do have to look at, is there enough food to eat? And in what we're eating, is it containing the right amounts, is the right balance of food for optimal health, for the best health that we can have, in terms of our proteins, our carbohydrates, our fats and our vitamins. And I'll have a look at some of these as well. And finally, it's also about, is there enough food, or is there more than enough food to eat? And if the food is there, are we making the correct choices? And how do we make those choices? And that's actually very, very difficult, particularly, in modern day now. And I suppose genetically we were set up to deal with famine and hunger. So if you think back to, the previous speaker was talking about the dinosaurs, but if we go on a few eras from that in terms of the hunter-gatherers. So, it was about foraging for food and storing up the food, because food wasn't as plentiful and wasn't as available. So genetically we're set up to deal with famine and periods of starvation. But we're really ill-equipped, I suppose, to handle modern day, our food environment, when we're constantly bombarded by food of all sorts. Some of it healthy, most of it not so healthy. And especially when we're doing so little in terms of activity. So if we think back, say, to our ancestors in 1916, the lives they lived at that time in terms of the food that was available, but also in terms of the levels of physical activity, were far different, and our bodies were, I suppose, more equipped to deal with that. And genetically we haven't really caught up with the modern food environments, which is why we're seeing so many of the diseases we're seeing today. So I'm going to focus just a little bit on some of the diseases and why it's important, why food is important, before I look at the diet and the options. So if we look at globally in high-income countries, which Ireland will be one of, what are the main causes of death globally? We can see here we have heart disease, stroke, we've got diseases like Alzheimer's, COPD, which are respiratory diseases, we've got cancers, diabetes, hypertension, and some breast cancers as well. Most of these conditions, the risk factors for most of these conditions are driven by our lifestyle. Not all of them, there are some genetic components, but most of the risk factors are modifiable. It's about the choices we're making in terms of our lifestyle behaviours. And if we look at, this was just dated from 2005, but there was 35 million people died from chronic disease. It was about 60% of the total deaths in that year. 80% of that was heart disease, stroke, diabetes, type 2 diabetes. And most of those can be prevented. And that's why we keep harping on about food, physical activity, and our lifestyle behaviours, because most of these are preventable if we intervene early enough in our life stage. These are some of the main risk factors, so the main causes of some of the main diseases, the chronic diseases that we see nowadays. So these are 19, and of these 19, 9 of them are diet related, of the main risk factors. So that's why, sometimes I suppose we get a bit complacent or a bit blasé, they're talking about food and health again, but this is why we keep talking about food and health, and this is why we highlight the importance of that link and, the importance of healthy food and healthy nutrition from early life, from, before the baby is born, right through our toddler years, especially in our school years and in that period between the primary school to secondary school and that leap. So that's why it's important. 9 of these 19 main risk factors are down to diet. When we look at chronic diseases, so these are the the patterns of diseases between 1984 and this is 2006. But the top one here, and we can see, is kind of circulatory diseases and cardiovascular diseases. And we have seen that the rates of these have fallen, which is a good news story. Much of that fall has been due to medical intervention, but some of it has been due to improved lifestyles as well. However, if we keep going the way we're going in terms of our current patterns of food consumption and physical activity, we are at risk of kind of starting to reverse some of these trends. So some of the cardiovascular trends have come down. I look at I suppose the profile of our population, but while cardiovascular diseases are coming down, some other diseases are increasing. So this is looking at dementia. This is from 2001, and this is projected up to 2046. So we can see, the projections for dementia and Alzheimer's and those types of cognitive conditions are projected to increase. And why is that? If we look at our population, our changing population, so this was the structure of the Irish population in 1989, and we can see it's kind of pretty much like a pyramid. Up at the top, we had very few older people, and down the bottom we were a lot younger. But going forward, and what's projected into 2041 is, our population, we're living longer. And, so we're living longer, there's a lot more older people, which is great and which is fantastic. But we need to not just live longer, we not just have quantity of years, we need to look at quality of years. So from early on, we need to look at our lifestyle behaviours and see how can we add quality to those years that we're living longer. So this was just one, this was from 2001 actually, that it was projected by 2050 older people will outnumber children for the first time. So, but along with our changing population, we're also changing our lifestyle. So this was a picture of a group in 1916, and we can see here most of that picture, they all look quite slender, quite thin, and some of them possibly quite underweight. But if we look at not quite a similar picture, but a picture of a group, and this could be of anywhere, in 2016, most of these are quite much a bit bigger around the waistline than the picture in 2016. And this is commonplace, and this is what we're seeing every day. These are some headlines, and there was more headlines again there in the last week or two about Ireland being said to be the most obese country in Europe. And this is according to the World Health Organization, who looked at trends over 53 countries. So these are quite worrying statistics. And going back to what I said at the start about, our combination of our lifestyle behaviours, and this actually arrow should actually be on unhealthy diets, given that we're talking about diet today. But if we look at our risk factors underneath, so they're the roots of the problem. So our physical activity, our inactivity, our unhealthy diets, tobacco and alcohol use. And then, looking at our tree growing up and the branches springing out, and our diseases, our mental disorders, and also our cognitive disorders should be up there as well. So we have four main risk factors for all of these diseases, and very modifiable risk factors. Linking with that, the American Heart Association has this thing, it's called Life Simple 7. And it's about looking at 7 steps you can take to improve your heart health, but also in terms of, and I know food for thought is part of the title of my talk, heart health and brain health are intrinsically linked. So what we do to improve our heart health, including our healthy diets, will also improve our brain health and our brain functions. But the Life Simple 7, according to the American Heart Association, is about getting active or physical activity, controlling our cholesterol, and that comes back to our diet, eating better, managing our blood pressure, again, is coming back to our diet, and we look at some of the causes of that in a while. Losing weight, again, our diet. Reducing our blood sugar, again, it's our diet. So it's about those Life Simple 7. If we look at how can we reduce the risk of dementia going forward, again, it's like the Simple 7, being physically active, following a healthy diet. And there's some specific foods and food groups that are really, really important in terms of brain health. And I'll highlight some of those in a little while as well. And also about challenging our brain. It's like any muscle or organ in the body. If you don't exercise it, you'll lose some of the function. And, if you don't train, you're not as quick to the ball or whatever. So, it's about challenging our brain as well and looking after our heart. So that's, why, and that's the importance of the whole idea of a healthy diet. But what does the balanced diet look like? So in Ireland, we have the food pyramid. In other countries, they've got the food plate, or they've different depictions. But basically in Ireland, this is the revised and the new food pyramid from the Department of Health. And we're encouraged to eat more from the bottom of the food pyramid and less from the top of the food pyramid. So the food pyramid, the way it's set up that way, it's basically looking at the food groups, and each shelf imparts a different function in terms of the food and the makeup of that shelf. So our bottom shelf here is where our 6+ is our cereals, our breads and our potatoes, and that's where we get most of our fibre, which is really, really important in terms of our digestive system, our bowel function, in terms of keeping our digestive system moving. We also get some vitamins and minerals here. Our fruit and veg shelf is where we're supposed to have about 5 or more per day. And it's a mixture of not just all fruit, not just all vegetable, but it's a combination of fruits and vegetables. And this, we certainly get some fibre here, but it's predominantly where we get our main vitamins and minerals to maintain our healthy bodily functions. Our dairy shelf is this shelf. So the bottom 2 shelves, we have 6 or more, 5 or more. Our dairy shelf, it's just 3 portions per day. So this is our milks, our yogurts, our cheeses. Higher proportions of those than the 3 servings can kind of increase the fat content and salt contents of the diet, but recommended if we have 3 portions, we'll get sufficient amount of calcium for our bone health in particular. Our meat, fish and poultry and the meat alternatives is predominantly where we get our protein sources. So that's our sources of protein in our diet. And for those of you who are familiar with the older food pyramid, the top 2 shelves were grouped together. We had fats, oils, sweets, or fats and sugars. But in the new food pyramid, these have been separated out because we do need a certain amount of fat, and there are some fats that are good fats, particularly in relation to our brain health, our brain function. So we have our fish oils, our omega oils, and we do need a certain amount there. So they have been separated out. And then up at the top, we've got our foods that we all like to eat, our foods that are high in fats, sugars, salts, or processed foods. Our sweets are treats, and that's exactly what they are. They're treats. We're not saying don't absolutely eat them. We're saying, in moderation, treats, not every day, and limit them to sometimes. This is all very well and good, and it's easy to say, look, just eat your pyramid, but it's a bit more complicated than that. So I said earlier on that nutrition is complicated. Within each of those shelves, we have choices to make. There are some good foods and some bad foods in each of those shelves, and I'll highlight some of them in a while. But one thing, particularly when I'm talking to out to schools and children, what we'd say is to eat a rainbow of foods, a rainbow of colours, right? So within each of those shelves, and when I say the rainbow of colours, it's naturally occurring colours, not our rainbow of Skittles or our sweets. But within each of those foods, each of those shelves, there's foods of different colours. So this helps to increase the variety of your diet, right? So, and each of those colours has a different function in your body. So if we look at the different colours, so our red foods, so like our apples or red cabbages or red onions, strawberries or watermelons. The nutrients that they contain, they're called flavonoids, or they have vitamin C and folate. They're very good in terms of heart health and our memory, so in terms of our brain function. Our yellow foods, or yellow and orangey foods, are really good again for our healthy eyes. So we've all, in terms of when we were growing up, carrots, and we've heard the saying, you never see a rabbit with glasses. And in terms of the importance of carrots and, eyesight, it's the beta carotene in the carrots is really, really good for your eyesight and your eye health. And also our immune function. So if we've got a cold or we're not feeling great, you'd often hear people taking vitamin C, and that's a boost to your immune system. But that vitamin C is naturally occurring in our oranges and our most of our fruits. In terms of our green-coloured foods, so we have our broccoli, asparagus, cabbage, kale, green peppers, really, really good in terms of our healthy bones, healthy teeth, and again, healthy eyes. We've got our white foods, ginger, onion, mushrooms are quite good in terms of our heart health again, coming back to our heart, but also our cholesterol levels. And then we've got our blues and our purple type foods. So that's looking at our dark beans, aubergines, blueberries, beets like beetroot, blackberries and figs. And they're really, really good and important in terms of memory and healthy aging. So they contain this anthocyanin, and is really, really good in terms of our brain health. What I don't have here in terms of brain health is our oils, our fish oils. So particularly oily fishes like salmon and mackerel, they're really, really good in terms of brain health because of the oils that they contain. So that's what's under the rainbow. So if we look at our food pyramid and then combine it with looking at the colours of the rainbow. So for example, if you're looking at your dinner plate, try and vary the colours, not just that you're having your protein source, your vegetables and your carbohydrate source, but vary the colours as well over the course of a week. So what are we eating in Ireland? We're pretty much eating an inverted pyramid. We're eating way too much from the top and not enough foods from the bottom of the food pyramid. I'm going to focus on two particular nutrients or dietary components. I'm going to have a quick look at sugar, and I'm going to have a look at salt, because they're two that we see in the news quite regularly. And I look at what we can do within our diet to reduce both sugars and salts. So this was a quote from Adam Smith in 1776, who said that sugar, rum and tobaccos were commodities which are nowhere necessities of life. So this was highlighted back in 1776, and it's still the exact same today. So if we look at sugar, and again, coming back to what I started with, nutrition isn't easy, it is complicated. There are some good sugars and there are some bad sugars. So we have naturally occurring sugars in our fruits and our milk, in our vegetables. And these are good sugars, and these are the foods that we get our vitamins or minerals, and they give us very few calories. On the other hand, in terms of the added sugars, which we're seeing a lot in the news about recently, these are sugars that are added to foods to make them sweet, to make them palatable. And these are the sugars that are contributing to our diabetes, our obesity, and our heart disease levels. So it's recommended that we have no more than about 4 grams of sugar per day. And that's actually quite hard, because most of the foods, and it's similarly when I talk about salt in a while, we don't know how much sugar, how much salt we're eating in a lot of cases, because it's added at manufacturer level. So it's about being aware of what foods and trying to make the healthier choices within the foods that we have to reduce our sugar intakes and our salt intakes. And these are just some of the news clippings from, this one is from the Echo, I think, just in relation to a study that we did here in Cork, where we went to 23 schools, primary schools, looking at 3rd and 4th class children. And we saw, very, very big sugar intakes in those children. We also, from that study, we looked at sugary drinks, and we saw a direct association between high consumption of sugary drinks and obesity in the children. And so we did see that, and we know that, and that's not just here in Ireland, that's not just here in Cork, that's across the board. But also in relation to sugar intake, so we see a lot in relation to obesity and those types of diseases, but it's also in relation to tooth decay and teeth and oral health as well. It's a significant contributing factor. So if we look at sugar and we go back to our food pyramid and look, what foods on the bottom shelf of this pyramid might be hidden in sugar. And if we look at our breakfast cereals, so breakfast is one of the most important meals of the day, but not all breakfast cereals are equal. So it's really, really important to check the food labels on our breakfast cereals. And the best breakfast cereals we can have are porridge and our healthy or our whole grain high fibre breakfast cereals. Porridge would be the best and is very good in terms of our cholesterol level. If we need to sweeten it, maybe adding some of our blueberries, which, combining those fruits as well. But really, check the labels on the breakfast cereals and try and avoid where possible or limit, as a treat for the sugary breakfast cereals to, the sugar-coated, chocolate-coated, honey-coated breakfast cereals. Really, really, they should be a treat as opposed to the norm every day. If we look at our fruit and vegetable shelf and, what hidden sugars can we see? And this is in relation to our tinned fruits and our fruit juices and our smoothies. So our tinned fruits, if you're buying tinned fruit, select the fruit that's in the own juice or water, not the syrup. So the syrup is just laden in sugar. In terms of our fruit juices, again, most of our fruit juices have an awful lot of added sugar. So if you are buying fruit juice, choose the ones that's not from concentrate or natural fruit juice rather than the ones from concentrate. And is similarly with smoothies. So most of the commercially available smoothies are very, very high in added sugars. In terms of our milk, cheese and yoghurt shelf and the hidden sugars here, our yogurts are very, very deceiving. Particularly low-fat yogurts are much higher in sugar for the most part than full-fat yogurts. So when they take fat out, they have to put something in to make it palatable, so it's the sugar is added in. So again, look at your yogurts and look at the labels to see, which some will be higher in sugars than others. Natural yogurts are, the best option, and then you can add your own fruit. But, even within different brands, the sugar content varies. Our meat, beans, poultry, and our protein shelf, and the culprits on this shelf in terms of sugar are baked beans. So they're really, really good for us, but not too much and not too often. Again, so there are some low sugar varieties available. So if you're getting beans, choose the low sugar varieties. But again, not too much and not too often. So reducing it, have water or calorie-free drinks instead of the sugary options. In terms of juice, just have one small glass. Limit your juice intake to one glass a day, and focus on the juice that's not from concentrate rather than the concentrated. And we'll look at some simple swaps that we can make in a little while as well. Just in terms of sweeteners, many people use sweeteners and query, are they safe? The ones on the market in Ireland are safe for human consumption, but there is some research looking at some side effects from some of them. So very quickly, just moving on to salt. We're recommended to have a maximum of 6 grams, but ideally between 4 and 6 grams per day. But as a nation, we're eating way too much, or across the board, we're eating much more than that. And almost 93%, most of the people from the last National Health and Lifestyle Survey were consuming more than those 4 grams per day. Irish adults were consuming between 7 and 10 grams on average per day, with some people having much more than that. Where does salt come from? Our cereals, again, are culprits, so it comes back to looking at some of our labels. And breads, particularly white bread. White bread can be quite high in salt. Our meat, our fish and our poultry, our processed meats, fish and poultry, not our fresh meats. Particularly, so for example, our sausages, our rashers, our chorizo, or those cured meats. And in terms of tinned fish, so tuna and those tinned fish, if you're buying tinned fish, choose the varieties that are you can have spring water or in oil rather than in brine, because brine is quite high in salt. And our soups, our sauces and spreads, particularly our packet soups, our packet sauces and our stock cubes can be quite high in salt. So again, look at the labels, because some of them are lower in salt than others. So that's in relation to adults, but what about children? So this is going back to the Cork Children's Lifestyle Study, and the upper limit, recommended limit that a child should have is about 5 grams per day, which is still quite high. And up to recently, we didn't know what Irish children were eating in terms of salt intake. The children's study I mentioned, if you look at this, so this is looking at the distribution of salt intake in both boys and girls. So if you look here at this 5 grams here, the number 5 here, so that's kind of what the upper recommended limit would be. But you can see in terms of the distribution, we have some kids, and these were 8 to 9-year-old kids, they were 3rd and 4th class, that had up to 10 grams per day in terms of their salt intake, which is quite worryingly high, really. Why am I focusing and why am I harping on about salt? We know that there's a direct association between salt and blood pressure. So if we go back to the start of my talk, I was saying one of the, heart disease would be one of the main chronic diseases in terms of deaths. And blood pressure is a key risk factor for heart disease and stroke. So we can see here as our blood pressure goes up, or as our salt intake goes up, so too does our blood pressure. So up here would be quite high salt intake, and that's the highest level of blood pressure. So that's why it's important, and that's why we do focus on salt. And if you have hypertension, you're more likely to develop heart disease and complications and stroke. And going back as well, so at the start of my talk I'd mentioned that, our bodies are, genetically not equipped to deal with our modern lifestyle. And as a species, we evolved to retain salt, because we do need a certain amount of salt to function, and we were primed to conserve it. And our kidneys, do a great job in terms of manufacturing the salt and the sodium in our bodies, but we're now taking in almost 10 times more than our bodies actually need. So just in terms of practicalities and salt, salt isn't always on the label called salt. You have sodium, you have sea salt, you have sodium chloride, potassium chloride, monosodium glutamate. They're all different words for salt, and they all have the same effect on our heart. So some tips to lower our salt intake: if we use some peppers and herbs and spices instead of salt, and it can add flavour to the food. And oftentimes when we're adding salt to food, it's masking the original flavour and masking the flavour of the actual food. Keep the consumption of processed foods really to a minimum, and we can't avoid them. It wouldn't be practical to say don't eat any processed foods, but certainly keep it to a minimum and cut down on the amount of salty meats. How many people here would add salt to their food before they taste it? Right. So what I would say to you, the next time you have a plate in front of you, before you eat anything and before you put salt on it, put a little bit of cling film over your plate, right, so you can still see the food, and just add the salt as you would normally add to your food. And it will give you an indication of how much additional salt you're putting on your food. And that's additional salt on top of the salt that's already in maybe your gravies or your sauces or the food that's on your plate. And as well, in terms of, I don't know, is that an Irish tradition when you're cooking your spuds, you automatically put salt into the pot, or when you're putting pasta, put salt into the pot. We don't need it. We don't need it during the cooking stage, for the most part. And taste your food. And if you do think you have a high salt intake, gradually reduce your salt intake over time, and your taste buds adjust. And it takes about 6 weeks, I think. That's what research has shown. It takes about 6 weeks for your taste buds to adjust. So gradually reduce it, and you do start tasting your salt, or tasting your food and tasting flavours. So I'm just going to finish up with just some tips on portion size and some practical tips on what indicators can we look at for portion size. So if we look at our plate, and our dinner should be about half a plate of vegetables, a quarter of protein, so that's our meat, our fish, or our meat alternatives, and a quarter of starch, so either our potatoes or rice or pastas. And where rice and pasta, where preferable, it's the whole grain options are preferable. And just some methods to monitor our portion sizes. So the palm of your hand is a really good indicator, or your hand. Some other, these are just standard portion sizes, a 200 ml cup, a bowl, and we have our teaspoons, dessert spoons, and tablespoons. But some handy reminders, so in terms of your hands that we have here, so 1 ounce is about, you can have your 2 cups. The palm of your hand is about 3 to 4 ounces, right? And I'll show you some pictures that will show you this now. Your thumbnail is about a teaspoon. Your fist is about a cup. And 1 cupped hand is, in some recipes you might see a half a cup of this or a half a cup of that. And your thumb is about 1 to 2 tablespoons. So if you didn't have any measuring equipment, so we have, our 2 hands of our veg, we have a fist of our rice, we have our 3 to 4 ounces of our meat, our protein source, and our thumb at the end there is about 1 to 2 tablespoons. Approximately, it's not precise measures, but approximately. So just in terms, going back to our pyramid, some healthy tips in terms of how to use the pyramid to help select a healthy breakfast, and also looking at that rainbow of food colours. So if we look at just taking breakfast, for example, so from our cereals breads shelf, you could have your cereal, whole grain versions preferably, and a slice of bread or a toasted bap. You could have a small glass of fruit juice that's not from concentrate or freshly juiced, or even a whole portion of fruit, preferably. You can have your milk on your cereal, or yogurt on its own, or with added fruit. Or you could have, your something from your protein shelf, which is your egg, be it boiled, poached, or scrambled, or even your baked beans. Just in terms of some swaps, healthy eating swaps, so we've got what would you take in terms of, as an alternative to sweet biscuits. We could have some crackers, low salt or no added salt ones. Instead of our, fizzy drinks, swap with diluted cordials, but to the correct dilution, not the highly concentrated. And going from our large bars to our smaller portion sizes. Our breads going from our white options or white varieties down to our brown varieties. In terms of ice cream, going from big, huge ice creams to smaller portions and maybe ice-based ones, and crisps or savoury to some fruit. This is just a picture from Safe Food, and if you are interested, their website, the Little Steps and also safefood.eu have really, really good suggestions and ideas for lunch boxes, healthy lunch boxes over the course of the week, and it gives a menu plan in terms of your lunch, again taking in the food pyramid and that eating that rainbow. So just finally, if you're fed up or terrified or just plain old bored with the whole thing with healthy eating, just beware, or just take note. It's just about perseverance and persistence, and it's not about changing the world. It's not about making big, huge changes that you'll be great at for 1 week and then it all goes out the window. It's about making small steps that will be sustainable over time, and that will ultimately impart a health benefit to you and your family. So I just want to acknowledge some of my colleagues for slides that I stole during the week, and that's it, and thank you for listening. So. Happily take any questions, comments, suggestions, or one out the door. Yeah.
Do you have any sources for checking out about labelling?
Labelling, the Food Safety Authority of Ireland have some really, really good resources. You can download all of their leaflets on their website, and as far as I know, I think Safe Food, so that's safefood.eu, which are actually based down in Little Island. They have an office in Little Island and they have one in Dublin, but they actually have some really good resources for labelling as well. And FSAI, I think, is fsai.ie. I think that's their website, but if you put the Food Safety Authority of Ireland there, it's good. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Cereals, which are curd and so forth like that. I just wonder if any views on the way the food industry has used that basis and exploited it to the nth degree.
Yeah.
And all the packets are showing wonderful things, but in reality, they contradict a lot of what you say in terms of the sugaring.
Yeah.
And has this department ever met the food industry people, and is there any kind of relationship between UCC and what's going on?
Yeah. Well, in our department, and I will say, and hold my hand up, with all of our research that we do, we don't take any industry funding. We specifically, it's on principle, we don't do anything with that. Some other, in terms of food research, and I fully agree with you, the food industry have a huge part to play in terms of the foods that we have available and that are there. Personally, and I know it's the view of my colleagues as well in our department, in the Public Health Department, we would be pushing for legislation rather than voluntary codes of conduct in terms of salt reduction, sugar reduction, and we would also be in favour of a tax on, for example, sugary drinks. We do need to engage with the food industry in terms of trying to reduce. Some of the manufacturers have reduced in terms of salt intake, the salt content of their foods, but it's been on a voluntary at a voluntary level. And it is actually for us, from a public health nutrition point of view, it's very, very difficult when you see the likes of some academics coming out and saying, making sweeping statements, but knowing that the food industry have been involved in some of the research. So it is, and it's not helpful in terms of the mixed messages that are going out there. So from our point of view, from a public health point of view, we would be saying, this is where we are, this is what we should be having, and what we can do is continually lobby in terms of government and putting the evidence out there. So in terms of for example, the salt intake in the children, that was the first time that we had seen that level of salt or those figures in Ireland. So it's a debate, and it's not a debate that's going to be solved today or tomorrow. It's not unique to Ireland. There's huge controversy and debate in the States about their food guidelines and there are recent updates because of influence from the food industry. But all we can do from public health point of view is put the facts out there and evidence, and that's what I hope we're striving to do. Yeah. Oh, that's an interesting one. What I would do, actually, I would reintroduce teaching children to cook in school. When I was in 5th and 6th class in South Pres, we had weekly cooking lessons, and I was cooking, all sorts. I'm not quite sure how palatable they were, but at that stage. But that would be one measure I would do. I would also look at portion sizes and availability of portion sizes and marketing to food marketing to children. There's no one solution. So when I started saying nutrition is complex, obesity is even more, and related diseases are even more complicated, and there's no one quick fix. And we're going to need a multi-pronged approach. We have some responsibility at the individual level, but we also have, we need government action, and we need action from policymakers to take a multi-pronged approach to tackling these conditions. So there's no one easy fix, but what I think would be beneficial would be to reintroduce cooking in schools. Teach. We have a whole generation that don't know how to cook, so that would be one thing. How feasible that is in terms of reality, I don't know, but maybe not even in schools, but at home, and cooking with family, and cooking, and helping out in the kitchen with children, if the school's option isn't available. Teaching, by whatever means, teaching our children the importance of healthy food, what a balanced, healthy diet looks like, and the importance that, food doesn't always have to come out of a packet. Yeah. The Food Safety Authority of Ireland website has quite a lot of information up there. Now, you might have to go digging for it. Now, I suppose food labelling isn't my area of expertise in terms of the actual numbers and what all the preservatives are. But the Food Safety Authority of Ireland they're responsible in terms of looking at the legislation for food labelling, and also at an EU level, there's an EU Food Safety Authority, which FSAI are associated with. So my first protocol would be, and for me myself, if I had to look up for information on food labelling, which I would have to, because, as I say, food labelling isn't my area of expertise, my first protocol would be the Food Safety Authority of Ireland.